And we could debate what we mean by culture. I talked about collective behaviours, and what I didn't say was actually in a group of people. The collective behaviours that we do time and time again in a group of people essentially makes cultures. And what Herrero says in his article is actually try not to go into the culture space, focus on the behaviours that culture, you can see culture through behaviours. We want to look at this, he calls it the atomic behaviours, right? The stuff that we can see. I want to spend a bit of time on what would that look like, right? We're going to do this in 3 stages. Why even bother? Why do we want to have a coaching culture? I mean, there's research, sure. But in your context, why bother? What are the benefits? What are the payoffs? What's the purpose of having a coaching culture?
Looking inwardly can be quite painful. Ultimately, it's very, very powerful because you're not just, everything comes from self, right? So by challenging yourself, I think that's probably the most powerful thing about coaching. It's not what happens inside the container, it's about what you think about outside of it.
How does that translate into the organisational benefits? Like I'm really intrigued by this, I think you said diversity of thought? Right?
Yeah,
deeper
thinking.
And how does that translate to?
It's personal awareness, I think, part of it.
Yeah. Is there more you want to add to that, guys?
Yeah. Our problems are quite complex.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think we solve them at the surface, but we don't solve the underlying deep problem. And we should, by better problem solving, actually have better solutions and therefore better products. And I think over the long term, more sustainable performance.
Yeah, which then comes back to performance, right? Kind of performance is the bottom line. And then there's this sort of actually better problem solving through diversity of thinking, through deeper thinking, right? So there's that breadth and depth stuff going on. Something that I think is a useful way of telling that story, just building on Liz's, we've got complex problems. And you could say that the complexity over time in our world is probably going like that, right? The complexity of the issues that we face, there's an exponential element to it, right? So what was it someone said, was it Einstein, I can't remember, it's like the leaders of yesterday have already solved yesterday's problems, we're just left with the ones they couldn't solve, which are the gnarly hard ones, right? So we've kind of got this real complex challenge in front of us that we all face, and this is as an organisation, but maybe as a society too, right? Our ability as leaders, as teams, as an organisation, to solve these problems has to keep up with the complexity of it, right? If the way in which we're thinking is not complex enough to be able to meet that, then we'll have simple solutions to complex problems which don't work. We've come across this many, many times before, right? We think, here's the answer, just do this, and then we haven't seen the whole system at play and it falls over, right? So there's this complexity gap. And what you're talking about here is that actually a coaching culture can help close that gap, yeah? By deeper thinking, by more rich thinking, by actually asking different questions. Jennifer Garvey-Berger, I mentioned before, one of her core tenets in her practice is ask different questions to come up with different answers. And I love that idea, that if we're just kind of running our old operating system, the way in which we used to do it in the past will serve us now, then eventually the apps that are running on the operating system are going to overwhelm the operating system, right? The complexity of our world is increasing. So we need more complex thinking, which helps us achieve that, right? The diversity of thinking that we get through coaching culture, right? If we get more people having conversation and inquiring with each other, you mentioned earlier on, you have colliding perspectives, you see different things, you see things in new ways and you'll find new ways forward. So this slowing down and asking the question gives us an opportunity to do that. Cool. Excellent. So the next step is, in this beautiful picture, is what? If you were telling a story to someone that didn't work in your area or didn't even work for NZDF, saying, hey, we've got a really good coaching culture going on here, what behaviours would you describe are going on? What are the few behaviours that you reckon would be would exemplify a coaching culture. And I want you to try and do what Herrero says in his article, is do those atomic behaviours. So I'll give you an example. I don't know, being inquisitive to me is not an atomic behaviour. That's like a concept, right? It's just like an idea. What do you actually see someone do? Yeah? They ask open-ended questions every time, right? That's an atomic behaviour, right? So I've just given you a tip. Like one of the ones in here that would exemplify a coaching culture is like we ask really good open-ended questions. Where's your leverage in all of those behaviours? On the job. Shifting to on the job. And if I was to get atomic, I'd say on the job asking questions. Using that learning cycle, right? What did you do? How did you go? What did you learn? What would you do more of? You know, that sort of stuff, right? Or maybe growing or something like that, right? But on the job asking questions as a leader, but also as myself, right? I drew that kind of that little, you know, not one big round circle and wait. It's like actually lots and lots and lots of little stuff. The Deloitte stuff, regular check-ins every week, 15 minutes. That iterative stuff, right? Awesome. So lots of little conversations regularly. Might be feedback, might be asking questions, might be a bit of both. I reckon your big challenge now is how. So how do you actually, is the word operationalise? I don't know. Operationalise the culture. Yeah. What are the practical things that you can be doing that can actually make this real, right? Because we know it in principle, we know it in theory, we know what to look for, we know why it's important, right? I reckon this is the time to go, well, where have I seen it work well before, and what was that? What happened? This is not about nailing it, and I want to come back to what the word Liz used before, which is experiments. What are the sort of things you could try and put in place that wouldn't, it's not actually create a coaching culture, because I actually think it's about more taking what is and just evolving it, right? I suspect you've already got the ingredients of it there, right? This stuff does happen. How would you amplify it? What are the practical things that you might be able to put into place that are actually within your control? We're not talking about what policies we can put in place unless you're in charge of the policy, right? So from where you sit, what are the sorts of practical things you could do to enhance the coaching culture that would bring those behaviours to life? Yeah? So this is a little bit, what have you seen before? What ideas have you got? What can you try? Don't make them big, make them small. Make them easy experiments you could potentially try. You could try and have a coffee cup with lots of good questions on.